Hello, everybody. I'm Aaron Porras, and thank you for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want you, our viewers, to have a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Professor Dershowitz, thank you so much for joining us again. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
All right, now to start our program, we have a breaking story. 25 years ago, a bomb ripped through the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, killing 30 people and injuring many more. Then 2 years later, another attack sharked Argentina. The Amia Jewish Center in Buenos Aires was bombed, leaving 85 more dead. Now, even though it's long been suspected that Iran and Hezbollah were connected to both bombings, no justice has yet been served. Well, in 2004, Alberto Nisman was appointed as a special prosecutor on the case, but just days before he was set to testify about how the then Argentine president had covered up Iran's involvement in the attack, Nisman was found dead in his apartment with a bullet in his head. At first, the government called his death a suicide, but now new reports have just confirmed that Nisman was in fact murdered after having been drugged and beaten. The gunshot to his head was staged to look like a suicide. This finding came just days after the Israeli Prime Minister's historic visit to Argentina, and joining in his delegation was Miri Ben-Zeev, whose husband was killed in the Israeli embassy bombing. Let's hear what she has to say.
Shalom, Professor. My name is Miri. My husband and I arrived to Buenos Aires with our little son, and I was pregnant, after serving two pressured years in Ankara, Turkey. We arrived to Paris of South America. 3 months before ending this service, my husband was killed in the terror attack on the embassy. It was very important for me to come back a few weeks ago with Prime Minister Netanyahu on his visit to South America. I still feel my husband's soul there, and Buenos Aires is still Paris of South America for me. And my question is, do you think after the evidence on Nisman, will truth ever come out? Thank you.
What a tragic way to end a career with you and your family there. It was an act of mass murder, and it was an act of mass murder committed by the Iranian government. It was also an act of war by Iran against the state of Israel. When you attack the Israeli embassy, you attack the state of Israel. Under international law, there's no difference between planting a bomb at the Israeli embassy in Argentina or planting a bomb at the Knesset in Jerusalem. It was an act of war, and Israel had and has a perfect right to retaliate. And I think this is an important point to remember as a point of law. If, God forbid, Israel ever has to attack Iran's nuclear reactors to prevent Iran from dropping a bomb in Tel Aviv, if they ever have to do that, they can deem it an act of retaliation. There's no statute of limitations on retaliation. The Iranian government attacked Israel when they attacked the Israeli embassy, and Israel has the right under international law to retaliate even 20, 25, 30 years later. It can pick its time, it can pick its place, it can pick its reason. And so we have to understand that within the context of international law. Second, the question is, what involvement did Argentina have? Not the current government, but a different government. And the evidence is mounting that Argentine officials, at least, were deeply complicit in this, along with Hezbollah and other groups, perhaps some neo-Nazi groups as well. And remember that Hezbollah does work together with neo-Nazi groups. Hezbollah is essentially a Nazi organization. It's amazing to me that so many on the left support Hezbollah and Hamas, which have roots, obviously, in the Muslim Brotherhood, the Nazi atrocities in the past. As far as Nisman is concerned, I mean, clearly the evidence points to a deliberate, willful assassination, a murder. The Nisman case and the bombing of the embassy and the other bombing, it's more interesting and stranger than fiction. It could be a Netflix series. It could be a feature movie. My son, a filmmaker who made Reversal of Fortune, I can imagine him making a film about the Nisman murder. And if this were a case in the United States, if a prosecutor in the United States were ever murdered, and there have been a few cases, the government never lets up. It will go to every end to make sure that the people or the persons who killed the prosecutor are brought to justice, or the country that might have been behind it are brought to justice. You can't have a legal system if prosecutors can be murdered. And so I hope there will be vigorous investigation and prosecution of all of those involved in the heinous murder of Nisman and the murder of Miri's husband and others who suffered from the Iranian Hezbollah, Nazi, perhaps Argentine war crime attack on civilians at an embassy.
I see. So let's turn now our focus to a place that you've spent a lot of time in. Thank you, Professor Dershowitz, by the way. But let's turn to American college campuses, where Melissa Landa was a rising assistant clinical professor in the College of Education at the University of Maryland. And despite winning awards, she was recently notified that her contract would not be renewed. Why? Well, the University of Maryland Office of Civil Rights is currently investigating possible discrimination in her dismissal, and many people are already saying that she was fired for openly supporting Israel. So let's hear her story.
Greetings, Professor Dershowitz. My name is Melissa Landa, and until recently I was an assistant clinical professor at the University of Maryland, non-tenure track, but getting ready to go up for promotion. You and I last spoke in the spring of 2016 when you helped me in my capacity as president of the Oberlin College chapter of Alums for Campus Fairness, which is a national organization that confronts BDS and anti-Semitism on American college campuses. Shortly after that very successful work, I joined the Academic Engagement Network, which is a faculty organization that promotes robust dialogue around Israel and promotes free speech. During that same time period, I began to have a lot of difficulty at work at the University of Maryland. People began to disassociate from me. I was removed from a teaching team I had been a part of for a decade. I was removed from courses that I had created and taught for a decade. I had won 2 awards, one for scholarship and one for teaching. I had positive student evaluations. But in June of 2017, while I was in Israel, I received an email informing me that my contract would not be renewed with no explanation. My question to you is, do you think that it's prevalent in the United States for faculty members to hide their relationship to Israel and their pro-Israel activity? Do you feel that that's common? And do you feel also that it's a trend to see professors who articulate their support for Israel face dire consequences, as I did? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Please keep fighting back. You have become a very important symbol of the double standard that applies in many universities. You're absolutely right. I speak all the time on university campuses about faculty members who quietly support Israel in their synagogues at Hillel, but refuse to speak out in ways that would make it public that they support Israel, because they know that if they support Israel, it will hurt them academically, it will keep them out of honor societies, it will deny them lectureships, it will have articles rejected, it will cause them not to be promoted. This is a major problem in many, many universities in the United States. And I'm glad you're taking a stand and fighting back. If there's anything I can do to help you, I'm there for you. I'm there for every professor who finds discrimination based on their support for Israel. And it's prevalent on many, many university campuses. I have felt it myself. I have felt it undoubtedly. I have to tell you that I was denied at least 2 honorary degrees as the result of being pro-Israel. And both of them came from universities with a significant Jewish identification. The argument was that if I were to get an honorary degree, it would cause all kinds of problems, all kinds of protests, and protests are inappropriate at university graduation. So I should understand that they're withdrawing their invitation to get an honorary degree, not because they don't like me, but because they don't want protests at graduation. But these are the same universities that have no problem giving honorary degrees to virulently anti-Israel people, including Bishop Tutu and others. And so we see a clear double standard applied. And that's why there are so many pro-Israel professors who remain in the closet, who refuse to come out, and who refuse to publicly support Israel, even though they do it privately. That is an unacceptable position on a university campus. You fought back. You didn't have tenure. You were not on a tenure track. You were very vulnerable. there's absolutely no excuse for professors who have tenure not to stand up for Israel if that's what they believe. If they don't believe it, that's one thing. But if they believe it, they have no right to simply express those views quietly among their friends and in safe spaces. They have an absolute obligation to speak out publicly.
Thank you, Professor. Now, while we're still on the subject of college campuses, there's a speech of yours at Columbia University that has been the talk of academic world for weeks. It even made headlines in the general media. Can you tell us about it?
Well, I was invited by a group of pro-Israel speakers, pro-Israel students, to come and speak at Columbia. And when it was announced that I was going to speak, Students for Justice for Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace, and other anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and sometimes anti-Semitic groups threatened to shout me down, not allow me to speak. They had previously done the same thing to Israel's Consul General in New York, and Ambassador to the UN, and of course in California to Israel's Ambassador to the United States. And so I heard about this and I decided to take preemptive action. I wrote an article in the New York Daily News indicating this was being planned. I went on television and I talked about it. I came up with a plan for how I was going to respond. As a result of all the acts that we took, the protesters decided to back down. They simply handed out leaflets, which was their right to do. They came into the event. They had 20 seats reserved for them, or maybe even more. They left leaflets on the chair, but then they refused to stay and listen to my talk. The last thing they wanted to do was actually listen to rational arguments about the peace process and maybe even be influenced by them. They prefer to see the issue in black and white terms, to demonize Israel. They refused to engage in dialogue. When I was invited to debate the head of the BDS movement at the Oxford Union, he refused to debate me because he said, I'm part of BDS. I am a Jewish Zionist, therefore I am subject to the academic boycott. And in the end, at Columbia, we won. Free speech won. We prevailed. I was able to give my talk. I think you can get it on Facebook stream or whatever. And it was a good event. It went forward without any disturbances. And I would like to see that happen all over the world. I was recently invited to speak at Berkeley by a group of Jewish organizations, pro-Israel organizations. And Berkeley has now refused to allow me to speak, claiming that because I'm high profile, they need 8 weeks advance notice. But if I had been invited by a department, they wouldn't need any advance notice. Now, here's the rub. Who's invited by departments? Barghouti, anti-Israel speakers, pro-BDS speakers, they're invited by departments, so they don't have to wait 8 weeks. Pro-Israel speakers are not invited by departments, so we have to wait 8 weeks. If the university applies the 8-week rule to me, not having applied it to others, I will sue them in federal court for violation not only of my First Amendment rights, but the First Amendment rights of the hundreds, perhaps thousands of students who would like to hear what I have to say about the Middle East. You can't have a double standard on a public university campus for pro-Israel and anti-Israel speakers. And the effect of their 8-week rule applied to me is to have a double standard. I don't get to speak, but anti-Israel speakers get to speak without having to wait 8 weeks. That's unconstitutional.
See, those are powerful words, too. I'm interested to see how that pans out. Now, moving on, though, the Israeli Defense Forces have a well-earned reputation as one of the most professional military services in the world. What's less known is that they have a special search and rescue unit that's ready to respond to natural disasters anywhere in the world. As a result, Israeli teams have been among the first to reach disasters in places like Haiti, Guatemala, and even Turkey. In fact, on the day of a recent earthquake last week that shook Mexico, an Israeli team was already on its way to help. Let's hear what a senior member of the team has to say to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Abubakr, and I am the chief architect of the Israeli Rescue Unit. I'm in charge of 2 major missions. One is evaluation of the collapse building, and then planning of rescue operations. So participated in 3 different missions during past, I think, 4 days. Since I measure time in hours, not in days, so I'm not sure how many days we're here. So don't take me wrong. But we did 3 main missions in my team. We checked the buildings to see if it could be returned to normal usage by civilians, as a request by Mexican municipality. The second mission was on site. We made evaluation of the damages and dangers on rescue site and made some planning how to do the rescue works. And third, the most important part is the rescue mission itself. I spent as much hours as I could on the on-site, supervising the missions and taking part in actual work, because it's our belief in Israeli Rescue Unit that we have to do anything we can in our capability to rescue as much people as possible anywhere in the world. We followed the earthquake in Mexico within the first minutes and hours, and we came prepared because we believe that human life is the most sacred thing, and we have to do whatever we can, whenever we can, to rescue people. Since we are in a few days after the Jewish New Year, I wish everybody to have a very good and safe New Year, as we say in Hebrew, Shana Tova. And thank you so much, Professor. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much, Michael, and to your incredible unit, Kol HaKavod. What you're doing is the essence of Pikuach Nefesh, saving lives. It's absolutely fantastic. The world ought to be so appreciative of what the Israeli military rescue units are doing all over the world. But I have a controversial idea. Why not draft all Israelis, Haredi Israelis, Arab Israelis, every single Israeli citizen, man or woman, should be drafted, but the ones who don't want to engage in combat, say Arab Israelis who don't want to fight against other Arabs, have them serve in this unit. Haredim, what conceivable excuse would a Haredi have for not participating in Pikuach Nefesh? That is one of the greatest mitzvot that you can possibly have. So I don't understand why at least this unit is not comprised of people from every walk of Israeli life. I work with an organization called Hatzalah, which rescues lives in Israel. Hatzalah has Israeli Arabs. Hatzalah has Haredim. When it comes to saving lives, there should be no distinction based on religion, ethnicity, or anything else. Saving lives is a universal, desirable outcome. And I hope that my proposal, my suggestion would be taken seriously by the Israeli military. It would help solve some of the conflicts now about the drafting of Haredim. I don't understand why any Israeli citizen should be exempt from serving the interests of his or her country. How you serve the interests of the country and the world is something that can be discussed and considered, but the obligation of a couple of years of public service should be something on everyone. And this unit of the Israeli military is the perfect unit in which we can have universal service of every single citizen of Israel. So I'd love to hear my proposal given further consideration.
Thanks, Professor. Now, we just have to ask about the one issue that sounds like every American seems concerned with. No, it's not with the Korean missiles or their nuclear threat. Let's hear from Shlomo Lushinsky.
Hi, Alan. I really enjoy your show. We're actually alma maters from the same elementary school, Yeshiva Eitz Chaim in Borough Park. But I enjoy the NFL more. And I had a couple of questions to ask you based on the player protests, which I'm personally against, but I can understand why they do it. And should these players be able to have the freedom of speech without having any intimidation at the workplace? Shana Tova.
Well, thank you. Great, great question, and best regards from Borough Park and Yeshiva Eitz Chaim. I know your father was at Eitz Chaim a couple of years before me. This is a very complicated question. As I understand it, different leagues have different rules, and all of these rules, since leagues are essentially private, are probably constitutionally and legally permissible. My own view is I would not ever, under any circumstances that I can imagine, refused to stand for the national anthem. America rescued my great-grandparents, my grandparents from the Holocaust many years before the Holocaust. We love America. I'm a loyal patriot of America. I would never burn a flag, but I defend the right of others to burn the flag. I defend the right of others to do what I would never do, namely kneel down. if I were an African-American ball player, and I'm not, so I can't speak for them, I would not kneel down. I would have the protest take a different form. I wouldn't do anything during the national anthem, but say just before the kickoff, do what players did during the Olympics many, many years ago. Hold up a fist with a black glove on it to protest racial injustice in America. That's a focused, particularized form of protest. You're not protesting America. You're not protesting the soldiers who fight for your liberty. You're not protesting the police who protect you. You're not protesting the flag, which stands for so much. You're protesting racial injustice. And you're raising your fist to specifically focus attention on racial injustice. But free speech can never be for me, but not for thee. So though I personally disapprove of sitting during the national anthem or kneeling, I would protect and defend the rights of players who choose to protest in that way. I think they have gotten much more support if they didn't involve the American flag. I think they would have gotten much more support if they just held up their hand in protest. There would still be those who objected to it, saying that the football field is no place for sports, as our Secretary of the Treasury said. I don't agree with him, that they should express their views outside of their workplace. But, I think when you're a national figure, an international figure on television, you use the opportunity that's presented to you. And so I defend their right. I disapprove of what they're doing. And I also think that President Trump's statements, particularly calling somebody an SOB, provoked even more protests. And I think this is going to be a continuing story. And I wish we could just focus on the specifics of racial injustice, which continues to exist in our country. We should also focus on other forms of injustice, anti-Semitism, which is increasing in our country, discrimination against others as well. But I think the form of protest shouldn't be against the flag. It should be against the specific injustice.
All right, Professor Dershowitz. Now, before we close off our show, we wanted to share a video that you've been sending to your friends in preparation for this year's high holidays. Let's check it out.
Tashlech, over the East River. It's very easy when you throw away your sins right over the East River. Gluttony, arrogance, self-righteousness, sins, all gone.
But the problem is I committed another sin. I polluted the East River by throwing my bread into the river. But, fortunately, I live literally, my living room hangs over the East River. So all I have to do is open the window and throw out the bread. And I have the easiest place in the world to do tashlech.
A beautiful view to do it with as well. All right, now, speaking of the high holidays, you once told me a story about what happened to you at a synagogue on the eve of Yom Kippur, the very day in 1995 when O.J. Simpson's verdict came in. Can you share that story?
Yeah, well, I was asked to come out to California to participate in the verdict, but I didn't want to because it was Erev Yom Kippur. Mm-hmm. I stayed home. I went to shul that night, and usually I'm asked to hold the Torah, to open the Ark, to do something honorific. The night O.J. Simpson was acquitted, people didn't even say hello to me. All they did is look to see when I did Oshamnu, Bogadnu, Dibarnu Dofi, whether I was hitting my heart extra hard when it came to counseling evil. No, I wasn't. I was proud of the role I played. I defend many, many people, some of whom are guilty, some of whom are innocent. The American system requires that everybody charged with a crime be defended. And so I do not have to seek tshuva for who I've defended over the 53 years of my career.
All right, now that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Professor Dershowitz, for joining us. Now, if you out there watching would like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to iltv.tv or our Facebook page and submit them, please. We can't wait until you'll join us next week. Thank you so much.